Yet another legal smackdown for the former president, Jacob Zuma, now leader of the Umkhonto weSizwe party, again in the Pietermaritzburg High Court. Zuma and the French arms firm Thales wanted their case to be summarily dismissed on a range of grounds, but Judge Nkosinathi clearly said, no, you must stand trial. And the points you've raised as prejudicing your case to the point of it not being fair, nope, that can be dealt with in the trial. Let's all get back together on the 4th of December. Karyn Maughn, a legal journalist at News 24. How many court cases are still in the works? His appeals of the denied appeals of the appeal which got lost in a corridor but was found in a bin recently, so reinstated. How many cases are ongoing?
Well, essentially what's happened is he's just recently filed an application at the Supreme Court of Appeal to seek to appeal Chile's dismissal of his second attempt to force Dana's removal, with such unique arguments as the very fact that his efforts to privately prosecute Dana and myself for alleged violations of the NPA Act, the fact that that had been found to be abusive, meant that he could reasonably perceive Dana to be biased against him and to want to wreak a campaign of vengeance in his prosecution. That is one of many arguments that he's now filed. Of course, the state is going to oppose that, but the most central part of today's proceedings was Dana getting up and saying, look, we're going to formally bring an application prior to the 4th of December where we're essentially going to ask that the trial proceed regardless of the appeals. And we're going to do that based on the ruling that was already given by Judge Pitkun, which Nkosinathi Chile repeated today, which was really about this alleged trial prejudice needing to be dealt with in the trial itself and not in these kind of extraneous processes that once they dismiss, then end up in a slew of appeals that never go anywhere. Let's bring that judgment forward and let's actually have a trial. Let's hear the evidence. And of course, Advocate Dali Mpofu, as you may well expect, saying that such a scenario was quote unquote unthinkable.
So is there a clearly obvious way to get Jacob Zuma into court and for the trial to take place and for him potentially to be found not guilty? I don't think we could accept whatever our personal views are of Zuma's guilt or innocence in this matter. I don't think it's a slam dunk that he's going to be found guilty once all of these matters have been ventilated and cross-examined and so on. So Judge Chile says, yes, I agree with you, Advocate Downer, and the trial will start on the 18th of May, 2026, and ex-President Zuma, you'd better be here or you will be in court. And Zuma will appeal that, and then he will say, because he's appealed it, the ruling must be stayed. So what is the mechanism that finally gets him into court to say, not guilty, my lord?
Well, the state is going to apply for the case to proceed despite the appeals. So they're going to say, and this is what they've indicated, that under Section 168 of the Criminal Procedure Act, it is within the discretion of the court to decide to grant a postponement or not to grant a postponement. And we do, John, have examples where the state, for example, seeks a postponement and the court says no, and the state is kind of forced to strike that matter off the roll. Or in other instances, the defense are demanding a postponement. And, as we've seen with the asbestos matter, the judge in that case refused it and said, look, you, in this case, one accused didn't have legal representation. He said, you sort that out in the interim, but we're running this case. So it is very much about the discretion of the judicial officer. And someone like Justice Crickler has been very outspoken about the fact that Stalingrad has been allowed to thrive because judicial officers aren't prepared to make those hard calls and say, listen, we are proceeding with this case regardless of your appeal. And I think there's this apprehension of some kind of really profound showdown between Zuma and the judiciary if they do that. But I actually think that needs to happen.
He's easier to predict than Trump, but so one can imagine a situation where Judge Chile or another judge says, The trial is starting. All of these matters you can raise during the trial to cast doubt on the evidence which is being led. You can raise them as sidebars, whatever. But the trial is continuing and there will be a verdict. And if you don't like the verdict, state, you can appeal. Defense, you can appeal. But the trial is starting. I think there's a real risk, Karyn, that Jacob Zuma will simply not pitch. And will he then be arrested for contempt of court? Will he be summoned to court under the threat of contempt proceedings if he doesn't? And then will he appear for the contempt proceedings? I think those are real risks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we have very good grounds for having that apprehension, because look what happened with the state capture inquiry and the Constitutional Court, and then Jacob Zuma's arrest, detention, and the chaos and violence that followed. And of course, the unlawful decision to grant him medical parole, which was then appealed, and, kind of politically expedited decision made to effectively release him as soon as he got into jail for the second time. So we've seen this movie before. But the alternative, John, is that we have a scenario where someone who's a well-resourced and very politically powerful litigant undermines the principle of rule of law by effectively saying there's one justice system for everyone else and there's another for him. And he's been able to do that for 20 years. He will, of course, argue that the state is substantially responsible for much of that delay. And the state should have prosecuted him alongside Shabir Sheikh in 2003. But the implications of him being able to successfully utilize this strategy, and if it's not dealt with effectively by the courts and they don't have that showdown and tell him he's not able to access that special treatment, the implications for rule of law in this country are severe. And I think that's really the issue, that it's at the heart of this whole thing. It's not about Jacob Zuma. It's about constitutional democracy.
Karyn Maughn of News 24, thank you very, very much indeed.